Welcome everybody to this webinar. This webinar is called Value Chain Disruption, an answer to the bankability challenges of hydrogen projects in the steel and freight sector. I'm Carina Krastel and the Commercial Director of the European Green Hydrogen Acceleration Center, which has been initiated by EIT InnoEnergy last year and which is supported by Breakthrough Energy. I'm going to be today your host and moderator of the session, and I'm really happy to have you all here attending. This webinar, as you know, is co-hosted by EIT InnoEnergy and Women in Green Hydrogen. And before we start the webinar, I really thank the team behind the scenes from Women in Green Hydrogen and EIT InnoEnergy to have this made happen and to bring us all together here. So what are we going to explore today? Today, we're going to explore how a value chain approach, and you learn what that will mean, can enable the implementation of really large-scale hydrogen projects to decarbonize hard-to-abate sectors, such as, for example, steel, but also heavy good vehicle road transport and maritime transport. How the webinar will be aligned today, we will start off with a short presentation of a successful value chain approach in the green steel sector. And here we'll have a presentation of Kajsa Ryttberg-Wallgren, who is the Executive Vice President of the Hydrogen Business Unit of H2 Green Steel. She will present the value chain approach and the H2 Green Steel venture as such, and will tell us about how the value chain approach enabled risk sharing, but also joint strategic alignment and actually an implementation that is agile to really overcome those challenges that come around green hydrogen projects today. After Kajsa's presentation, we'll have a Q&A session, so please feel free to already plug your questions during the presentation in the chat box that you see in the GoToWebinar platform, so that we can ask you later on to call on them. After then Kajsa's presentation, we will explore how this approach of value chain that H2 Green Steel has so successfully managed today, how can this be copied and pasted, if at all, to the freight sector, so meaning to road transport where hydrogen can be used, as well as maritime sector, so looking at green methanol as well as green ammonia. And I'll introduce you afterwards the really high-level panelists that we had today here. We're really excited to have this conversation with you. So please be free and share, participate for questions, so we have it as interactive as possible. And now, Kajsa, I would hand over to you. Please introduce yourself quickly and H2 Green Steel, and then we'll start with the presentation.
Great, thanks a lot, Carina. First of all, I want to say that I feel honored to be part of this meeting today. So many senior women working with hydrogen. I can't be happier. And also another short remark on myself before I start. So as Carina said, today I'm the EVP of Business Unit Hydrogen at H2 Green Steel, but I joined 2 months ago. It is really a new venture. And my passion for hydrogen started in 2014 when I was heading a business unit at Sandvik, where we produced components for fuel cells. Then I saw something, that why are not everybody seeing this? Hydrogen is such an excellent, back then it was a fuel then for mobility, but why are everybody fighting so much about this? So I worked with that for some years, and then after a few years later, I joined Yara International, a big fertilizer company, and then I also saw the door to the industry possibilities to the energy system. So I was so convinced, and that's also why I decided to join H2 Green Steel, because I knew that here we really can make a difference, and I am a true believer in hydrogen. So that was just a little bit of a background. So Carina, if you want to move into the first slide, and I will take you through what we do at H2 Green Steel, the background of how we actually, where the idea came from, and what we're doing next. I don't see the first slide yet, Carina, so you know.
Now?
No.
No.
Now, yes, great. So where does the story begin for us? Before I go into H2 Green Steel that you can see here on the left, I wanted to talk a little bit about our founders. So our founders is an investment company, you could call it, called Vargas Investments. And that is a different type of investment company. They are focusing on ideas that can enable sustainable development and really, really large scale potential. In 2015, they founded the battery or storage company Polarium, which is focused on telecom, commercial, and industrial segments. That kind of brought the idea that why can't you buy any battery cells in Europe? That was kind of a seed in the idea for another company called Northvolt that probably some of you have heard about. So they brought in a former Tesla executive, Peter Carlsson, and in 2016 they founded Northvolt, a company that today they will deliver the first product towards the end of the year. It has an equity valuation of 10 billion euro, and already now, before they actually delivered anything, have an order intake of 25 billion. So that's the kind of magnitude of companies we're talking about. This was also where, and I should also say, a very innovative way of talking again about the value chain to see and to finance this kind of startup was to talk to the customer and see, would the customer be willing to pay a premium for a green product? In the Northvolt case, it would be a green battery cell. And the answer was yes. And one of the big owners in Northvolt is Volkswagen. And that was also where the idea a bit to H2 Green Steel started to come alive. So yes, batteries, that's great, but what about how the car is actually produced? What about steel? What about aluminium, etc.? And as most of you probably know, the steel industry is one of the biggest emitters of CO2 globally. So if you go to the next slide. So that was one of the starting points, you could say, for H2 Green Steel. So how can we actually decarbonize the value chain for steel that would go into a car? That was kind of the first step. This discussion started at the same time as Hybrid, another green steel venture, you could call it, in Sweden. They announced a successful pilot of a smaller scale way to produce carbon-free or fossil-free iron or iron sponge to go into steel production. So we knew the technology was there, it was possible. And of course, then you have the European Green Deal. And like I said, from the Northvolt case, they knew that let's start with the customer, see what the willingness to pay is for a green premium. And that was the foundation of how we started. So with this as a basis, if you go to the next one, we developed the purpose of the company. And our purpose is to decarbonize hard to abate industries for the sustainable benefit of 5 main stakeholders. And the 3 to the left are, I would say, the usual suspects. Of course, you need to do it for the customers, employees, and investors. But we were really, it was really important to us to include society and our planet at the core of our business model and our purpose. So those are equally important as the other ones. Of course, we have to be profitable. We have to have a bankable case, and we are not doing this, you know, as a non-profit. It is a profitable business, but when we do that, we take into account society and our planet. And we start with steel. We're not only in steel, but we start with steel. And why is that? So if you go to the next slide, Carina. So first of all, like I said, there is a demand from the customer side, and that is we are super customer centric. So there is a demand from the customer side that they would like to have a green product and they're willing to pay a premium to get that product. Number 2, technology is also there. Not at the scale that we are looking at now, and I will get back to that, but there is technology available that you can use. So the technology is there in the steel industry. Capital, there's a lot of capital available, and especially for green type of projects of this scale. So we don't see capital as a limiting factor if we can prove a bankable business case. And number 4, of course, there is a lot of debate now, a lot of discussion how, and also after Glasgow, etc., how we can actually work to decarbonize the industry and hard to abate industries. And it's super interesting to see that the dialogue has gone away from just scope 1 or 2, but actually also now focusing more on scope 3 emissions. And that's in many ways where we come into play. If you take the next slide. So what are we doing then? What is H2 Green Steel doing? And for those of you who are not familiar with the value chain or production process for steel, in a traditional route, you would basically take, you start with the iron ore, you bring that to a blast furnace, you would fire it up, if I put in simple terms, with coke and coal. That will emit a lot of CO2. Out from there, you take the iron further into the steel making process and casting and hot rolling. There are 2 main problems with this compared to what we are going to do. The first one, and the most important one, is of course the blast furnace route, where you use a lot, you emit a lot of CO2 because of coal. The other part is also that normally in this setup, you would have the different steps in different locations. So you would heat the product, cool it, heat it, cool it. So it also requires more energy. What we are doing instead is the electrified route. So we will take iron ore pellets, we will bring them to a direct reduction reactor. And what is happening in that step? Maybe I should explain that for those of you who are not into steel like we are. Why you are, basically you need to take out oxygen from the iron ore. And you can do that by using coal, that you would connect then the C to the oxygen, you will emit CO2. Or you can use hydrogen and you would then create H2O, meaning water. So what we are doing, we are injecting then hydrogen into the DR reactor and reducing iron ore to become iron sponge in that way. We then bring this into an electric arc furnace that is also electrified, of course. So that is again reducing the emissions, and then we do this in the same place. So we are avoiding to coal up or heat up and cool down the product along the way. So we're also reducing the energy consumption. And by doing this, instead of emitting about 2 tons CO2 per ton of steel, we have below 0.1 ton. So 95% reduction in CO2 emissions. If you go to the next one. This would not be possible if we would not build an extraordinary team. And we are not building a team like just another steel company. We are really looking at this from a different perspective. So we are truly a social impact or green impact company. That's one side of it. We also realize that we need to bring in people from all around the world with the relevant competence to make this happen. We are all, I can also put it like this, that digitalization, I worked in many industrial companies before, and it's everybody working with this, but we really put it at core of what we do. We are building a digital DNA, it's part of our DNA, you could say. So as a really first step, what we did was to recruit Olof Hernell, or it's an early step, I should say. He is coming from EGHAC as a CDO, and before that worked for Google, and he has really the attraction to recruit similar people. So we are building a strong digital function that will also help us along the value chain in the production, of course. So we are building this team, bringing in people from all around the world, from different backgrounds, and it's some steel, some hydrogen, and many things in between. You can take the next one. So our first project then, and I should also highlight that what the picture you see is a rendering, so it's not up and running yet. It is important to us that this business is a successful business in its own rights. So the case we are embarking on does not require any grants as like in the base case. Of course, it would be possible for us to get it, but it is a business case by its own rights. We have the highest standard in all aspects of sustainability. And it's also, I will get back to that, it's a proven platform to scale up. And it's a center for development of really the emerging hydrogen and digital technology that will be required for this type of business. If you go to the next one. So more in detail than what we are doing. This is the value chain, and this is, we would not be able to do this alone. So we have partnerships. So the input to the iron making part, you can actually click one more, Carina, I think that's even better. So for the iron making part, we need the iron ore pellets. So we are now working on close partnerships and collaborations for how to get the iron ore pellets into our process in the best way possible. In terms of renewable electricity, as we are developing a gigascale electrolysis, we need, and we want to be green, we need a lot of green electricity. The good thing with being in the north of Sweden is that there is an abundance of it. You have a lot of hydropower, and we also have wind. The problem is not actually the volume, the problem is to have the power coming to one point at the site. But that is one part, and there we are collaborating with energy companies. In the DR reactor itself, we are of course collaborating closely with the equipment provider, and then in the steel production plant, it's managed of course in-house, but we take in the best expertise that is out there to make this happen. And all of this we have to do, so it's 3 platforms you could say: green hydrogen to feed into green iron making, to feed into green steel. That basically then allows us to take out the green premium towards the customer. And I should also say then that the 3 platforms here, we are looking at scaling globally. This is a lighthouse project, the first project we do up in Boden. We could take all 3 of these platforms to other places in the world. We could take 2 of them, so hydrogen and green iron, or we could take just hydrogen. That's what we are looking at now. But our first priority is, of course, to get this up and running in Boden. If you take the next one. As an example, we are building, as of, we believe, in 2024, we will be the first one to have an electrolyzer of the size of 800 megawatt. We have that combined with about 1-2 hour storage at our site. What is quite unique is that we are combining alkaline, PEM, and solid oxide in one site. We do that from different reasons. They have different pros and cons, but that's what we have decided to do. We've actually some weeks ago, we filed our first patent for our own algorithm for how to optimize the cost side, a lot related to electricity, of course, for our hydrogen production. Because as all of you know who works with hydrogen, it's, I shouldn't say all about cost, because of course safety comes first, but really is about how to bring down the cost. And that's one of the main purposes of the algorithm that we have developed. If you go to the next one. So just to mention briefly then, like I said, so we are a venture startup company, or we are now, I guess, starting to come into scale up. We closed our first Series A financing round in May this year, 86 million euro, and you can see some of the names here who decided to invest in us. And there are FAM is, for instance, the Wallenberg family, big family in Sweden. You have Kingspan, who is in construction. And then you see some other more automotive companies. And then we also have, for instance, Daniel Ek, who is more of a tech guru, the founder of Spotify. So there are many different investors who wants to be part of this. And if you go to the next one. We are right now opening up or kicking off our Series B financing, where we are looking for 3 billion euro in financing, 1/3 more or less in equity and the rest in green project financing. So that's where we are right now. And we, like I mentioned before, so if you go to the next slide, we are putting this first project in the north of Sweden with a 95% reduction of CO2, producing 5 million tons of steel by 2030, scale up from 2.5 million in 24-25. And this can only be possible if we also install gigascale, or actually 800 megawatt green hydrogen production unit. We do this together with our partners. We have already signed, just like Northvolt, we have also signed offtake agreements. Some of them have been published, that's why I can share it. You have probably, or those of you who follow this, there is one with BMW, for instance. There's another big one with Klöckner. And of course, Scania and Kingspan are our investors. So we are working, we're doing this in close partnerships with customers for the future. I also want to highlight that on the right side here, you can see, so our first initiative is the black one, so it's Boden in the north of Sweden. But we are already approached by and in dialogue with other partners in other places in the world. And as you can see of the dots here, they are in locations with a favorable electricity prices. Maybe the only exception is in the south of Africa. But apart from that, we do see a great potential in this. We would never go and just build hydrogen by ourselves. We would do it together with a partner. It could be on the green energy side, it could be on an offtake side, but that's how we operate. So these are ongoing partner discussions for electrolysis above 500 megawatt that we have ongoing now. And if we go to the next one. So like I said in the beginning, our purpose is to decarbonize hard to abate industries. Our focus is large-scale green hydrogen production with direct offtake. We believe that steel is the first one out. That's why we start there. The other ones that we believe in, as you can see here, is ammonia, aluminium, and shipping. And shipping, of course, you have different alternatives. Those are the ones that we believe will come, at least within the coming 10 years. Steel is first. And I also want to highlight another thing in terms of value chain, because I mean, my background is like I mentioned, also from the fertilizer industry, and the big advantage I would say in both steel and aluminium is that the value chain is in relative terms short. So you can actually talk to the customer and have it agree to a green premium. In fertilizer, it's a very long value chain from the hydrogen to what the bread you have on the table. So even though the price increase needed to cover this, it's only like 0.6%. The hard part is the value chain and how to make that work, how to make sure that the farmer also get benefit from this. So I think that was my final slide. So if you go to the final one, that is what we do in H2 Green Steel. We are really super dependent on large-scale green hydrogen production. That's the foundation. And by doing this, we believe that we can definitely be part, not only decarbonize the European steel industry, but we can be a lighthouse project for India and China and show them what is possible, and hopefully they will follow suit. Thanks a lot, Carina.
Thank you so much, Kajsa, for this great presentation. Super interesting, and I think our audience also really appreciated it. I think before I take a few questions from the audience, what I would like to ask you, if you can answer for that, is like, can you just highlight a little bit more what for you are, let's say, the key success factors of making this work and how the value chains plays into it? I mean, you've mentioned, for example, fertilizers, you know, longer value chain. So how did this work for H2 Green Steel? What did you do? And also, what are the difficulties behind it?
I think a number one here is to really get the customer buy-in. So the willingness to pay a premium, because it will come at a premium for at least the coming years. So to really show that there is a customer out there who is willing to pay, because that makes the case more bankable, I would say. And of course, you can put in a higher price in your valuation model. So that is the number one criteria that we see, really follow the customer and see the willingness to pay. a premium. Another challenge, I would say, and this is of course depending on where you are in the markets, is permits to build something like this. That takes time. So for instance, it was before I started, but I heard first time because we need a new, like I said, we need a lot of power at one point at the site, and then you need to involve a special part of the government and make that happen. And first time we talked to them, I've been told, they said, yeah, you can have it in 2032, and we said, no, we're going to start 24, so that doesn't work. And then they got back to us, okay, 27. So, you know, it's that type of permitting, that part of infrastructure investment that is a bit outside of your control. That's a very big challenge to make this work.
Super interesting. I think I also want to just highlight for the audience that this is really a project at incredible scale. And especially when we look at, you just mentioned the figures, you know, like a hydrogen, let's say, facility of 800 megawatts, mixing different hydrogen technologies. I mean, that must be also on the hydrogen side quite challenging. So what do you encounter as the head of the hydrogen business unit on the hydrogen side there?
No, of course, from a bankability point of view, you would like to just put in an EPC, engineering, procurement, and construction for this site. But it's impossible. Or of course you could try, but there's no one who's done this before. So that is also a challenge to combine in-house resources and engineering competences with the best consultants that are out there to make this happen. That's one part of it. Another part is, of course, that if you want to buy this magnitude of electrolyzers from one provider, it's also impossible. Nobody can provide that today. So they're very long lead times, and they sometimes have to build a new production line to make it possible. So that's another challenge, I would say. The third challenge is, of course, that it is assumed that prices will go down on the equipment side the coming years. So one could ask, why would you invest in that now when you then have an equipment base that is much more expensive than the competitors that would enter like 3 years later? That's also a challenge, but you can get around it partly.
Super interesting. Thank you. I'll take up a few questions from the audience. We have a few minutes left. One, for example, is on, can you please elaborate a bit on the power supply and the financing connected to that? Because I mean, I guess that's really special up there in Sweden, really good renewable power resources that are, so a really interesting question, yeah.
No, I mean definitely. So we are looking at different setups, and I can't go into the details, but of course, in order to have a bankable business, if you assume that about a little bit short of 70% of the cost in hydrogen production is electricity, at least if you base it up in the north of Sweden. Of course, if you have fluctuations there too much, or if you can confirm the price to the investors or the banks, it will be very hard to finance the case. So with that said, in Sweden, that's also why we put this site in Boden, because you have very, very favorable conditions for a low electricity price. Right now, not. I mean, now is the worst period to negotiate electricity prices, I would say. But in general, it is a very favorable location to have an electricity price, so you can reach a levelized cost of hydrogen that is totally bankable without any grants. Yeah.
Really interesting. And then there's actually, I think, quite a question that links to that. Is one participant asked, like, isn't there a risk that industry will move away from Europe, especially when you compare, let's say, the renewable energy situation in Sweden compared to that one in Germany, for example? And what can steel companies do to counteract that? I mean, what's your venture, answer to that?
No, I think it's right. I think it will change, because you can look at the reason for why you have steel mills located where they are today. And in the past, it was very much related to natural gas or coal, right? And coal, I should say. But now it's very much more related to where you can get green electricity at abundance and at a low price. And that is the north Sweden and Norway, I would say, might be in the south of Spain or Portugal. Of course, you have Brazil, you have Chile, you have Australia for the future. But if you talk Europe, I would say it's the north and the south. So yes, it will change. But of course, then you can play with subsidies and things like that to get it going. You can use this route that I talked about, the electrified one with a direct reduction. You can use natural gas instead. That would be better than coal, but still not green, right? So that's another path to take and work with carbon capture instead. That's not what we believe in. We believe in green and electrolysis based, but that's a very fair question, and it will be interesting to see the coming years.
Really, thank you, Kajsa. One last question, and then we have to move on to the panel. Someone is asking, H2 Green Steel seems quite independent from political decisions. Do you confirm this impressions, or do you work with public authorities other than for, let's say, permitting that we've already mentioned?
No, we are definitely dependent, and it is especially on permitting, I would say. So it's on the permitting and it's on power to one point, definitely. And of course, we are also, this is a big venture, and we are looking into other type of public funding initiatives. So no, we are this kind of venture. It's 20 or 35 billion SEK, so 3.5 billion euro investment, definitely. And the site, the steel mill itself, is like 200 hectares. It's huge. So yes, we are very much dependent, and we have to work in close collaboration both with the European Union and the Swedish authorities.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much, Kajsa. I think there's still so many questions open, but yeah, we can only answer so many. Maybe you can answer a few of them afterwards through people contacting you directly. But thank you so much for your presentation and for helping, like, let's say, shape the image of the value chain approach. Let's see how we can transfer that to other value chains with other hard based sectors. Thank you so much. Thanks you.
Thanks a lot. I was very happy to be here.
Okay, thanks. Bye.
Bye.
So now we're moving on to our panel discussion. So I would like to ask my panelists to join and turn on their cameras individually before I'll introduce you. So as you've seen now, we've explored what does it mean, let's say, or what did it mean for H2 Green Steel to build this. And I think it was super interesting what Kajsa shared with us, because I think one of the key advantages that they have is what she said, is that an off-taker is willing to pay a premium, and that the off-takers are also involved in building the business case. And what we'd like to explore now is, can we copy-paste this approach, let's say, to the freight sector, meaning road transport as well as maritime transport, where hydrogen can be used to decarbonize. And so I'm really, really happy to have my four panelists with me here on board. And I'll quickly introduce each of them. So we'll have Noelle Fröhlich. She is the senior expert of clean operations at DHL Group. Berit Hinnemann, she is the head of decarbonization business development at AP Møller-Mærsk. Marion Castains, who is the manager of business development at Future-Proof Shipping. And Rian Wolters, who is the head of marketing and communications at Van der Waals BV Logistics. And she is representing a PME, so SME. So I'm really happy to have you here. And I would start off, so as we structure the panel like that, we'll start off with each panelist sharing a bit, let's say, the challenges that they see on their position in the value chain. Because you see, like, we have, for example, Noelle. She's representing, let's say, both sides, but today she will speak more as an off-taker of green logistics. Berit, who is actually, providing ships and fuels, let's say, for providing green logistics. Marion will talk about, let's say, the overall value chain, because she sees it from both sides. And Ryan will talk to us more about, let's say, road transport from a operator, logistics truck operator. So, we have women that represent different areas of the value chain. And therefore, I'm really happy to have them and share a bit the decarbonization strategies of their individual companies, as well as the challenges that they see in their position of the value chain. And later on, we move on to seeing, okay, how can we overcome those challenges and create solutions around it. So Rien, I would call upon you first. So if you please can introduce yourself, your company, and the challenges you see today on road transport using green hydrogen.
Yeah, I will. Thank you for having me here, Carina, and the rest of the listeners, of course. First of all, I would like to tell you something about Van der Wal. Van der Wal is a logistics service provider, and as you mentioned, we offer road transport, but also flexible storage and the logistics optimization. And our history goes back for nearly 100 years now. 2024, it will be the 100. And since then, we have grown from a very small company to an international organization with over more than 400 employees. And we have the presence in 7 countries. Our mission is to always look and find the most sustainable transport solution for even the human being, but also the environment. And sustainability is a very important thing for us, I think, for more than 30 years. So we are very busy with that subject. First of all, maybe it's okay to introduce something about the decarbonization strategy we already have at Van der Wal. 2 years ago, I started with a program called Kill Empty Running. And maybe first of all, it's good to start with some figures, because currently there are 6.6 million trucks driving on the European roads. 6.6 million, so that's a huge amount of trucks. And in the Green Deal of Frans Timmermans, we agreed on at least 30% less CO2 emissions from now till 2030. So that's a huge impact, and as such, we have to take serious actions on to realize these decarbonization targets. So what I did 2 years ago, I started a program within the organization with a couple of colleagues, of course. And in this program, we are looking at ways to reduce the CO2 emission. And we already succeeded to take some concrete actions. We called it the so-called low-hanging fruit. And yeah, maybe it's good to tell something about the road transport, because the most important thing to do to lower the CO2 emissions right now is to increase the load factor, because you can imagine that the load factor nowadays in the trucks is about 45–50%. So half of them are driving empty. And of all the trucks, staggering 33% are totally empty. So when you see a truck driving, 33% of them is driving totally empty in the Netherlands. Yeah, it's amazing. And you can imagine that when you drive 1 kilometer, it costs 1 kilo of CO2. And yeah, we are looking at what you can do to compensate that, for example, with trees. And when you take into account that a tree has to grow for a year to compensate 22 kilo of CO2. So if we manage to drive 22 kilometers less on a empty truck, then we will need 1 tree less for a whole year to grow. So the huge impact.
Yeah, sorry? It really shows, Rian, that let's say the dimensions are really off there, you know, like, I mean, 1 tree for 22 kilometers, it really is. So there's a real challenge behind it, I think, that you have to solve there. Huh?
Yeah, exactly. So nowadays we can do a lot about it to have a cooperation with other carriers and shippers, and we are very actively seeking for that kind of possibilities. Another thing is that we are a member of the EIT, and it's a European Clean Trucking Alliance, a broad coalition of European businesses and organizations, and we are catalyzing the shift towards zero-emission trucking. And together with more than, I think now, 25 to 30 members, we developed the concrete policy recommendations and provide input to even the European, but also the national governments to have influence on the policy there.
And Rian, just to ask you, what do you do today when it comes to, let's say, overcoming those, let's say, decarbonization strategies? Do you work with the value chain approach, or how do you see that? I mean, you said you work in collaboration. How do you do this today?
Yeah, well, the low-hanging fruit is what I told before. So it's about the time delivery, to have more flexible time deliveries. It's a very operational thing, but the effect is huge nowadays. However, using a hydrogen truck, for example, will of course make much more impact on lowering the CO2. And that's why we are in contact with different OEMs like Mercedes and Hyson. And we are seriously looking at possibilities of investing in a hydrogen truck. So our CEO, for example, is already driving a private car in hydrogen. So I think the hydrogen truck is a very good solution. But yeah, we have to take the big challenges there. And that's, for example, the investment of the trucks. When you buy a new truck, the hydrogen truck costs nowadays 460,000 euros. 460,000, and compared to a diesel truck costs 85,000 euros. So it's 5 times as high. And you can imagine we can't get a positive business case on that one. So that's the first challenge we have to look after. A second one is the amount of the hydrogen fuel stations, because for a long haul truck you need a 350 bar fuel station, and within Europe we have less than 30 in whole Europe at fuel stations who offer the 350 bar fuel stations. So you can imagine when you drive a long haul truck right now, it's not possible to do that. So we have to invest also in that one. And the third one is the price of the fuel by itself, because it's 3 times as high as compared to the diesel. For 1 kilometer we pay €1 for the fuel, and it's only 30 cents for diesel, or only, that's also a big amount, but a euro is 3 times as high. And besides, it's what is offered right now is the gray hydrogen, and we would like to have the green hydrogen, of course, to have more impact on the CO2 lower emissions.
So maybe if I could summarize there, there's still, let's say, there are still quite some big challenges. So we have an issue with the cost of the truck, we have an issue with the cost of the fuel, and we have an issue of the infrastructure. So from, let's say, a logistics provider, small logistics provider, really willing to do something, there's still a lot of questions, even though you told me in the introduction that there are some customers willing to pay, because that's what Kajsa told us earlier. Yeah. But thank you again for this integration first on the road transport. I would then move on to Berit. Berit, can you please quickly introduce, let's say, your company, as well as, let's say, the challenges you see as a logistics provider for maritime fuels?
Yeah, absolutely, Carina. And thanks so much also for the invitation. I think it's exciting to be here, and I think it's a very important topic that we are discussing. I mean, I'm working at Maersk, which is an end-to-end logistics provider, and also with a large container shipping line. And we have very ambitious decarbonization ambitions. About 3 years ago, we announced that we are targeting net carbon neutral operations in 2050. And we are looking at all aspects of our business, both, of course, our shipping operations, but also our landside operations. So today I will speak to the shipping operations, and I would also like to give a few numbers to just illustrate the magnitude of the transition for Maersk. We have about 700 large container vessels, and we use about 10 million tons of fuel oil each year. So this illustrates the magnitude of the decarbonization challenge, and also it illustrates that 2050, that is not very far away from us, because an average container vessel has a lifetime of around 20 years. And so we need to start to transition our fleet. And also we think it's really important that there's action already this decade. I think the COP26, the IPCC report, I mean, they have made that very clear that we need some action soon. Regarding our container fleet, I mean, what we did when we announced our net carbon neutral 2050 target 3 years ago, we looked at a lot of technologies and fuels, and so what is feasible for ocean-going container shipping in terms of technology, in terms of scalability, in terms of economics. And what we're doing today is that we pursue 3 main pathways. And the first, and it is biodiesel, and it is green methanol, and it is green ammonia. And the reason why we are pursuing these 3 pathways is biodiesel. Obviously, the advantage is that it's a drop-in solution, and we can use this fuel in our existing assets. And we are actually already doing that today. And we also have a carbon neutral transportation product, the eco delivery product, that we are already today offering to our customers. And then we are also working with green methanol, and I'll speak to this in a minute, because this is something that we are already that we have plans to implement in our fleet. And just to speak briefly to green ammonia, we see great potential in green ammonia because it's can be a zero carbon fuel. But here our focus is on the technical and on the safety feasibility at the moment, because some more steps need to be made. The 2-stroke engine is under development. And also we're looking at bunkering, we're looking at safe handling of the fuel on board. So this is where our focus is regarding green ammonia. Regarding green methanol, I mean, we see that as a solution that can be implemented, and we also have plans to do so. Because on the technical side, there are vessels out there who use methanol as a fuel already today. And also on the fuel production side, green methanol is not produced at scale today, but the technology is there to do so. So regarding the green methanol, we have very specific plans. We have ordered 1 feeder vessel, that container vessel, a 2,000 20-foot container vessel that will operate from 2023 onwards in Europe. And for this container vessel, I mean, that will use about 10,000 tons of green methanol per year. And we have also announced that Reintegrating European Energy will produce the green methanol for this vessel from a facility in Denmark. And we have also, to scale up this effort, we have ordered 8 large ocean-going container vessels. They are much bigger. They have a capacity about 16,000 20-foot containers, and they will use around 40,000 tons of green methanol per vessel per year. And the first of these vessels will start in the first quarter of 2024. So these are some very specific steps. And in terms of the impact, well, once these 8 vessels are phased in and operate on green methanol, they displace about 1 million tons of CO2 per year. And this can be compared to the CO2 emissions from our container vessels in 2020, which were about 33 million tons of CO2 equivalents per year. So that takes out 1 million tons of CO2 out of the 33. So we are on our way. And on our way to transition the fleet. As for the biggest challenge is to scale up the production of green methanol. As I mentioned, this is not produced at scale, and there has been a lot of discussion about the chicken and the egg problem. What needs to come first? Is it demand? Is it supply? And so on. And with these vessels, we have a very specific demand, quite a large demand actually, from 2024 onwards. So with this, we really can move beyond this discussion and engage in very serious conversations with project developers, with producers, and so on to source the green methanol for these vessels. And this is also what the focus on of the work of my team is, to engage in those discussions and to ensure that these vessels can operate on green methanol as soon as possible.
And Berit, a question to you. How do you engage, if you say engage, and what do you see as issues today on your end? What annoys you, in your daily work?
Well, I mean, I would rather put it. I mean, what are the key challenges? Of course, the production of green methanol needs to be upscaled, and as it also has been mentioned before in the keynote by Kajsa, I think, is the first projects. They are the most expensive ones. They are the ones. I mean, the first green fuels projects and also green methanol projects in this case, they are the most expensive ones. They carry the most risks, and so on. But they are necessary as first movers to get to scale. And so what we really see as important is to do this in close collaboration across the value chain, and also to see how can we make these first green methanol projects as competitive as possible, and how can we go on a cost curve, and what can each of the parties do to reduce costs and to share the risks to actually enable this upscaling of green methanol production. And this is very specifically what we are engaging in with a number of parties at the moment.
Very interesting. Thank you, Berit. And I think I want to just highlight that really your company is really a front runner in this area. I mean, having announced, to run ships on methanol, this is a big announcement. I think that shook up the industry, those are the companies, we need companies like this. So thank you very much. I would move on to Noelle now. So Noelle, I mean, Berit hasn't talked a lot about offtake. We heard from Kajsa that offtake is quite important and having someone willing to pay there. So Noelle will talk to us a little bit about that from her end, but before doing that, she'll present a little bit her company and the decarbonization strategy. Thank you, Noelle.
Yes, thank you, and very glad to be here today. I work at Deutsche Post DHL Group. I think DHL is a company that most of you should know. We are one of the largest logistics companies in the world, and similar to Maersk, what Berit was saying, in 2017, we already communicated a net zero target for 2050. But this year, recently, we increased our ambition to climate protection and issued a CO2 reduction target until 2030. That includes all our global operations. So it's for scope 1, 2, and 3. And it's at Deutsche Post DHL, around 80% of our emissions are in the scope 3 area. So one of the sub-targets that we issued this year was that by 2030, we want to have a 30% sustainable fuel share in all transport modes. So that's air, ocean, and road mainly for us. And in some of these areas, Deutsche Post DHL is a carrier. So for example, we have close to 300 own aircraft and more than 100,000 road vehicles. But in many parts of our business, this is a topic where we have to collaborate closely with our transport partners as well as customers. For example, in ocean freight, we do not own any own vessels, and we have only scope 3 business. So achieving 30% by 2030 is certainly a challenge, and it will not happen by itself, and it will not happen without close collaboration across the value chain. I think some of the other panelists have already mentioned that luckily we do see that more and more business customers are willing to pay premiums for green transport solutions, and I think there's a lot of potential in this. And also, of course, the collaboration on the other side with the carriers, with our transport partners, is very important to achieve an upscale and an increased use of sustainable fuels in logistics and freight operations. We are doing a lot in that regard. We have the first pilots ongoing with hydrogen, for example, on the road, with sustainable aviation fuels for air freight, and also within our ocean freight operations. But the availability of sustainable fuels is still very limited, and there's still a long way to go until 2030, I would say, until we can achieve this.
Great, thank you, Noelle. And you just mentioned quickly, let's say, off-takers on your end. Like when I remember we did the briefing together, you said there were a few companies, let's say, maybe more from the tech side, that are interested to pay a premium. What do you see today? Do you think there's a way to integrate them in the discussions? Do you do that already at DHL? How do you do that? Also looking upstream and downstream, because you're a midstream player.
Yes, definitely. We have issued or we have brought the first products on the market for sustainable freight solutions by using sustainable fuels. We have a lot of customers, and yes, you mentioned that there might be some industries where there's a higher willingness to pay additional than in other industries, but in general, we really see an increasing trend that more and more customers demand green transport and are also willing to contribute. We do see a lot of challenges when it comes to, especially in the scope 3 area, where we are not able to put sustainable fuel into our own vessels. So there's definitely, when it comes to accounting, when it comes to who receives the reduction, who is able to claim those reductions. I think also my fellow panelists are talking a lot about concepts like book and claim solutions, like insetting solutions in that field right now. And that's definitely a focus area for us, because we definitely believe that it makes most sense to introduce those fuels into the system close to where they are produced, and that it reduces the sustainability and also increases the cost of these sustainable solutions if you are required to physically track them across your operations. So that's definitely a focus area for us to really find a practicable solution that that is also possible to be upscaled to really accelerate the production as well as the use of sustainable fuels in logistics.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Noelle, for this insight on your end. Now I would give the hand to Marjon. I think you probably wanted to react directly to what Berit has said earlier. So please share with us a little bit what you're doing in brief, if possible, and a little bit your challenges that you see on your end.
Yes. Thank you very much for this opportunity today. It's great to be here and with these great panelists also. I represent future-proof shipping. It's actually among these companies a very different type of companies, because we exist for just about 4 years. Future-proof shipping was founded specifically to accelerate the transition to zero-emission shipping, and that's industry-wide. The strategy is to start with inland shipping, because there zero emission is already possible, move on to coastal or short sea shipping, and then finally end up in deep sea. We focus only on zero emission solutions, so we don't do any transitional fuels or technologies. And we do this in 2 ways: by creating our own fleet. Currently, we have 3 inland vessels, which unfortunately are not zero emission yet, but which are to be retrofit to zero emission in the next years. And then slowly we aim to move on towards short sea and finally deep sea. And the second way to do this is from the learnings we get from our own projects and own vessels, then to also apply this as a consultancy, basically, for other projects with other ship owners or other players in the value chain. In terms of challenges, I recognize everything that everybody is saying. Also from Kajsa, basically what she mentioned as a new player, and to be able to connect to all the parties in the chain, etc., etc. Our project is actually very similar to hers, but on a much smaller scale. The first project we had with the first vessel was also started up with a cargo owner, which unfortunately cannot be mentioned yet, but and we really worked together to create the project for the first zero-emission inland vessel sailing on hydrogen. There is a few zero-emission vessels currently already in the market, but not 100%. Not for cargo vessels, and not 100% zero-emission often. So, and this was really together with the cargo owner who connected us and who supported us throughout the full journey, basically. The big challenges that we also face, well, to be able to identify them, we do have to make the distinction between inland and deep sea, because on deep sea, as Berit also mentioned, there's still a lot of technological challenges, let's say, and also in terms of fuel and fuel availability. But if you look at inland, basically the technology is ready. the fuel or the energy carrier could be ready. It is really about finding the parties that are willing to support this. So as Rian also mentioned, she mentioned the truck to be 5 times, a hydrogen truck to be 5 times more expensive than a regular truck, let's say. Also in our case, a hydrogen vessel would be about 3 times more expensive than a truck with an internal combustion engine. A vessel with an internal combustion engine. So there's also a very large difference, and then the same challenge also with the actual the OPEX. So also the cost of operating it, the hydrogen cost, but also the way you need to handle the hydrogen, etc., etc. So there's additional costs along the chain. So the cost is really for inland the biggest challenge to overcome. There's also regulatory challenges yet and standardization to take place. But on a pilot level, you can implement a vessel as soon as finance is available, basically. So basically that's what I've been trying to do for the last 3 years to get cargo owners and logistics service providers to be willing to commit, because that's another part. It's not just about the cost, but it's also to be willing to commit for a number of years. So you can actually really justify the investments towards the banks or investors that are actually would need to make a considerable contribution also. So that's really how it relates basically to all the stories that we've heard so far. Yeah.
Thank you, Marjon. It's really interesting because it kind of closes our discussion in that sense. What I would do now, because we are at 31 now, so our, let's say, session is almost over. But what I would like to do, I would like to make a short summary of also what I heard when we were discussing prior in the briefing. So what we see is, what we've heard from Kajsa is we have to have someone that is willing to pay. That's number one. And we heard today that from Noel, but also I think from Berit, because they have made this commitment already to invest into green shipping, is that there are certain front runners that are willing to pay. And I think those we need to identify and highlight them. And there is a call out to those to connect to us. So the Nikes in this world, the Amazons, the IKEAs, who are interested in green shipping, reach out to Berit, reach out to Noel, reach out to Ryan, reach out to Marjon, and to me. That's also important. And then so we need to identify those off-takers. We need to identify front-runner companies like Maersk, like DHL, that are willing to do something and also commit. That's what Marjon just said. We need to be able to make connections. We need to enable risk sharing and sharing a common business case and have an open book approach, which is also important that everybody trusts in what is being done. We need to work on booking claim systems in order to understand who is actually receiving the carbon emission reduction. So there's a regulatory question here as well. And we need to look in general in regulations on an international scale as well, because it's someone that mentioned that to me as well during discussions. This is an international problem, especially maritime shipping. There needs to be an alignment there. So yeah, we see that there is a lot of challenges, but I believe like when we look at what H2 Green Steel has done, they took a bold approach to this. And I think we've seen Maersk as well as DHL, they're companies that are taking a bold approach, and I think that we will see more and more of this because there's also a business opportunity behind green logistics. So yeah, thank you all for your participation. And I just would like to thank also, let's say, the team behind the scenes, and I just want to mention them quickly by name. If we have that more time here, I would like to thank Martijn, Anna, Maren, Lillian, Julia, and Charlotte for helping out here to develop all this, and to the panelists as well as the speaker, Kajsa, who already left. Thank you so much. And I hope the audience enjoyed it, and we'll share the recording later. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.